Kelechi used to believe that the happiest day of his life was the day he married Chisholm. He often told his friends that she was the best thing that ever happened to him. She was beautiful, gentle, and full of dreams, and in the beginning he treated her like a queen. He would bring her little surprises, take her out proudly, and remind her that she was his treasure. But as the months turned into years, something inside him changed. The love that once felt warm and tender slowly turned cold. His words became sharp, his laughter turned into mockery, and his affection into arrogance. He started seeing her not as a partner but as someone beneath him, someone he could control. Chisholm noticed the change, but she kept hoping he would return to the man she fell in love with. Instead, he grew distant, careless, and harsh. The home that once felt safe began to feel like a prison. Every smile she forced came with hidden tears. And though she never spoke it aloud, deep inside she wondered how the man who once promised to protect her could become the very one breaking her heart. Do you want me to move on and expand part 2? The Night of Shame, 200 words? In the same style? That evening was one Chisholm would never forget. Kelechi had invited a few of his close friends over, and the house was filled with loud laughter, music, and the strong smell of alcohol. Chisholm moved quietly around them, serving drinks and clearing the table, her heart heavy but her face calm. She didn't want to embarrass him in front of his friends, so she did everything carefully. But no matter how much effort she put in, it was never enough for Kelechi. The more he drank, the more his voice grew louder, and the less patience he had with her. At one point, she tried to remind him gently that it was getting late, but instead of listening, he snapped at her. His friends laughed, and in that moment, his pride mattered more to him than her dignity. To prove his power, he stood up, raised his hand, and struck her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the room, and for a moment everything went silent. Then his friends burst into laughter. Instead of stopping him, they cheered him on, as if it was entertainment. Chisholm froze where she stood, her cheek burning with pain, her heart breaking into pieces. She could feel the hot tears filling her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of those men. Inside, she wanted to scream, to run, to ask him why. But all she could do was stand there in shock, her hands trembling as shame wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. That night, in front of the very people who once celebrated their love, he reduced her to nothing but a joke. And while everyone else forgot the moment with the next drink, Chisholm carried the scar in her soul. She knew then that something inside her had broken forever. Do you want me to write part 3? Chisholm's silent tears, 350 words? Next, in the same emotional viral tone, Chisholm could not hold back her tears that night. As soon as the laughter of Kelechi's friends faded into the background, she felt the warm drops rolling down her cheeks. She didn't cry loudly. No wailing, no shouting. Just silent tears that carried the weight of her pain. She slipped into the bedroom quietly while the men continued drinking, pretending as though nothing had happened. Sitting at the edge of the bed, she buried her face in her hands. Her heart pounded, her body shook, and her soul felt crushed under the shame. She asked herself over and over, how did I get here? How did the man who once promised me the world become the one to humiliate me in front of everyone? But as the night dragged on, those tears slowly changed. With every sob, a strange strength began to rise in her chest. At first it was small, just a whisper inside her heart telling her, you don't deserve this. You are more than this. She had endured his cold words, his arrogance, and now his public violence. Something inside her refused to be silent anymore. She realized that the tears running down her face were not a sign of weakness. They were washing away the last bit of patience she had for a loveless marriage. Chisholm wiped her face and looked into the small mirror by the bed. Her eyes were red, her cheeks still swollen, but behind the pain she saw a fire burning. She whispered to herself, this will not be the end of me. One day he will regret this. That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake in the dark, planning silently, her mind already moving toward freedom. Her tears had watered the seed of determination, and though no one knew it yet, not even Kelechi, something powerful had begun to grow inside her. Do you want me to continue with part 4? The decision to leave, 350 words? In the same tone? That night, while Kelechi and his friends drank themselves into sleep, Chisholm made the hardest decision of her life. She sat in the darkness of the bedroom, her heart racing, her eyes swollen from crying, but her mind was clear. She knew she couldn't stay any longer. Every moment under his roof felt like chains tightening around her neck. Love had turned into humiliation, and her marriage had become a cage. Quietly, she pulled out a small bag from under the bed and began to pack. She didn't have much, just a few clothes, her certificates, and a small savings box she had hidden away over the years. Each item she placed into the bag carried a memory, some sweet, most painful, but she pushed the emotions aside. She moved slowly, careful not to wake him, her hands trembling as she folded her things. Every sound in the silence of the night made her freeze, but she kept going. Her heart ached when she looked around the room that once held her dreams as a bride. Now it was just a room filled with broken promises. Before leaving, she stood at the doorway for a long moment, staring at Kelechi's sleeping form. Once she would have kissed him goodnight. Now she felt nothing but emptiness. Chisholm whispered to herself, "I deserve better. I will not die in this pain." With that, she quietly stepped out, shutting the door on the life that had stolen her joy. The air outside felt cold yet strangely free. For the first time in years she breathed deeply, her chest rising with courage she didn't know she had. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew one thing. She would rebuild herself piece by piece with dignity. Do you want me to continue with part 5? Starting from nothing, 350 words? In the same emotional viral tone? Chisholm stepped into a new world with nothing but determination. She had no family nearby to lean on, no savings that could carry her for long, and no friend willing to take her in for free. First, life was unbearably hard. She rented a tiny one-room apartment on the edge of town, where the roof leaked when it rained and the walls were cracked. But every time she looked around that little space, she reminded herself, it was hers. No one shouted at her there. No one raised a hand against her. It was freedom, and that was enough to give her strength. To survive, she took any job she could find. She cleaned offices in the early mornings, helped at a small food stall in the afternoons, and in the evenings she worked as a cashier in a local shop. Some days she came home with aching feet, too tired to even eat, but she never allowed herself to complain. Each coin she earned, no matter how small, was a brick in the foundation of her new life. She saved every naira she could, cutting down on food and clothes just to have enough for tomorrow. At night, while others slept, Chisholm stayed awake with her books. She borrowed old business materials from a neighbor and spent hours studying by the dim light of a single bulb. She believed knowledge was her way out of poverty and pain. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself in a big office, leading people, building something she could call her own. That vision became her fuel. Even on nights when tears threatened to fall, she wiped them away and kept reading. The world thought she was just another abandoned woman struggling to survive. But deep inside, Chisholm was quietly planting the seeds of her future. Every sleepless night, every long day of work, was shaping her into someone stronger than even she realized. She was starting from nothing, but she was not planning to stay there. Do you want me to continue with part 6? Education as her weapon, 350 words? In the same tone? Chisholm knew that if she wanted to rise above her struggles, she needed more than just hard work. She needed knowledge. With the little savings she had managed to gather, she enrolled in short business courses at a local training center. It wasn't easy. Sometimes she would go to class hungry because she had spent her last money on transportation and materials. She often sat in the back of the classroom, taking notes carefully, determined not to miss a single word. While others complained about how hard the lessons were, she welcomed the challenge, because she wasn't learning just for grades. She was learning to rebuild her life. Outside the classroom, she sought guidance from anyone who could teach her something useful. She found mentors in unexpected places. An elderly shop owner who taught her the basics of managing accounts, a kind lecturer who encouraged her to dream bigger, even a neighbor who shared tips about customer service. Slowly, she gathered little pieces of wisdom and stitched them together into a vision for her future. Every lesson became a weapon, every piece of advice a shield against the hopelessness that once tried to swallow her. Persistence became her best friend. There were days she wanted to give up, when exhaustion from her multiple jobs made it hard to keep going. But each time, she reminded herself of the night Kelechi humiliated her in front of his friends. She remembered the sting of that slap, the laughter of the men, and the tears she cried alone. Instead of breaking her, that memory pushed her forward. She promised herself she would never again be at the mercy of someone else's power. With every new skill she gained, Chisholm's confidence grew. She began to carry herself differently, her back straighter, her eyes sharper, her heart stronger. The pain that once felt like a chain around her neck was slowly transforming into fuel for greatness. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing for a life that would silence every voice. Chisholm poured her heart and soul into the opportunity she had been given. In the beginning, the road was rough. There were long days of planning, endless nights of strategy, and moments when failure seemed close. But she refused to quit. Every challenge only reminded her of how far she had already come. From walking away with nothing to standing here with a chance to create something great. Slowly, her small company began to take shape. She hired a few staff members, treated them with kindness, and built a team that believed in her vision. Within a few years, what started as a simple idea grew into one of the fastest rising firms in Abuja. Her office, once a single rented room, became a shining building where people came for solutions, opportunities, and jobs. Clients trusted her because she didn't just offer services. She offered integrity, passion, and results. Newspapers began writing about her, calling her one of the most visionary young leaders in the country. She was invited to speak at events, her words inspiring other women who had once felt powerless. Chisholm never forgot where she came from. She carried her scars with pride, but instead of letting them hold her down, she used them as proof that strength can grow out of suffering. Each time she walked into her office and saw her employees smiling, she felt a quiet joy inside. She had built something no one could take away from her. She had risen from the ashes of humiliation and pain, and now she stood tall, untouchable, respected, and admired. Her name traveled beyond Abuja, reaching other parts of Nigeria and even across Africa. People no longer saw her as the woman who once endured shame. They saw her as a force of power, a leader with vision, and a symbol of resilience. The girl who once packed her bags in silence had now become the woman who changed her own destiny. And this was only the beginning. Do you want me to continue with Part 9, The Inevitable Encounter, 350 words? In the same emotional viral. The day of the big merger meeting felt like any other to Chisholm, yet it carried a destiny she could never have imagined years ago. She arrived early, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit with a touch of traditional elegance, her head held high. The boardroom was filled with some of the most powerful businessmen in Abuja, all waiting to negotiate terms with her company. She sat at the head of the long polished table, calm and composed, reviewing her notes with quiet confidence. Then the doors opened, and in walked a group of executives from the partner company. Chisholm lifted her eyes, and froze for just a second. Leading them was Kelechi. Behind him were the same old friends who once sat in his living room, laughing when he humiliated her. Time seemed to stand still. Kelechi's confident stride faltered the moment his eyes met hers. His jaw tightened, his face drained of color, and his friends exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had expected this. The woman they once mocked, the woman they treated like nothing, was now the one sitting at the head of the table. The power was in her hands. She didn't flinch, didn't let her emotions show. Instead, she gave a small, polite smile and gestured for them to take their seats. The room was silent except for the shuffle of chairs. Inside, Kelechi was burning with regret. He remembered the night he struck her, the laughter of his friends, the tears on her face. Now those same men lowered their eyes, unable to meet hers. The weight of shame filled the room. Chisholm, however, remained steady, her voice calm and firm as she welcomed everyone to the meeting. She was no longer the broken woman they once knew. She was their equal, no, their superior. In that moment, the tables had turned completely. The pain of the past had transformed into a victory so sweet that no words could describe it. Do you want me to continue with part 10? Their shock, 350 words. In the same emotional viral storytelling style? The boardroom, once filled with the usual noise of business chatter, suddenly felt heavy with silence. The men who had once sat in Kelechi's living room, cheering when he slapped his wife, now sat stiff in their chairs. Their eyes refused to meet hers. Some cleared their throats nervously, others stared down at their files pretending to read. But nothing could hide their shock. The whispers began to flow quietly around the room. Is that her? She's the CEO? The same Chisholm. The disbelief was written all over their faces. Kelechi's friends, who once laughed at her pain, now looked as though the ground beneath them might swallow them whole. They had never imagined that the woman they thought was powerless would rise to such heights. Each time their eyes flickered toward her, they quickly looked away, embarrassed, ashamed, and humbled. They had seen her at her lowest moment, and now they were forced to face her at her highest. Chisholm sat calmly, her back straight, her hands resting gracefully on the table. She didn't need to remind them of the past. The memory was already haunting them. The way she carried herself spoke louder than any insult could. The same woman they once dismissed was now the one whose signature could decide the future of their company. Kelechi himself was drowning in regret. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry, his thoughts running in circles. He remembered how he once laughed at her dreams, how he never believed she could survive without him. Now here she was, not just surviving but commanding respect in a room full of powerful men. The entire boardroom buzzed with murmurs as the reality sank in. She's the new CEO. She owns the company we need. The shame of the past pressed down on them all. Chisholm didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone was the loudest reminder that no one should ever underestimate a woman who has been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. Do you want me to continue with part 11? His regret, 350 words, in the same. Kelechi sat frozen in his chair, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear the voices around the table. The confident man who had walked into the meeting was gone, replaced by someone pale and trembling inside. His eyes darted toward Chisholm, but every time she looked up, he quickly lowered his gaze. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The same woman he once mocked, the woman he slapped in front of his friends, was now seated in power, holding the future of his company in her hands. Regret crashed over him like a heavy wave. He remembered the night clearly, the sting of his hand on her face, the laughter of his friends, her silent tears. At the time he had felt proud, as if proving his dominance made him a man. But now, sitting before her success, he realized how foolish he had been. Instead of crushing her, he had only pushed her to rise higher. And now she was above him in every way that mattered. His friends shifted uncomfortably beside him, each of them silently regretting the part they had played in that shameful night. But for Kelechi, the regret cut deeper. This wasn't just about humiliation. It was about the life he could have shared with her. If only he had loved her, supported her, cherished her as he once promised, maybe he would have been standing beside her today, not across from her, begging for her approval. He clenched his fists under the table, fighting the storm of emotions. Shame, anger, jealousy, and sorrow twisted inside him. For the first time in his life he felt powerless. The decision that could save or destroy his company rested on the lips of the woman he had once treated like nothing. Kelechi knew he couldn't erase the past, but he also knew one thing with painful certainty. This was the day his arrogance finally came back to punish him. Do you want me to continue with part 12? Chisholm's poise, 350 words. In the same emotional viral style, Chisholm sat at the head of the table like she had been born for that seat. Her presence alone commanded the room. She didn't need to slam her hands on the table or raise her voice to make people listen. Every eye was already on her. When she spoke, her tone was steady, calm, and confident. Each word rolled out with a quiet authority that left no room for doubt. The men in the room leaned forward, not because she demanded it, but because her voice carried weight that could not be ignored. Kelechi sat stiff, his chest tightening with every sentence she spoke. He expected anger, bitterness, maybe even mockery. But there was none. Chisholm didn't look at him with revenge in her eyes. She looked at him as if he were nothing more than another name on a file. That indifference cut him deeper than any insult could have. To her, he no longer mattered. She explained the terms of the merger with precision, her words sharp but respectful. She addressed every concern raised in the room with solutions that showed her intelligence and foresight. The same men who once laughed at her were now nodding at her brilliance, scribbling notes, and whispering about her leadership. The power she carried wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind that came from survival, from rebuilding herself when no one believed in her. Inside, Chisholm felt the weight of her past pressing against her heart, but she didn't let it show. She remembered the tears, the humiliation, the nights of hunger and study. But now she also remembered the fire that kept her moving, the dream that had brought her here. This was her moment, and she was determined to carry it with dignity. By the time she finished speaking, the room was silent with respect. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't humiliated anyone. Yet everyone knew who the true leader was. Chisholm proved that real strength doesn't need noise. Real strength is calm, unshaken, and unforgettable. Do you want me to continue with part 13? The tables turned 350 words, in the S. By the end of the negotiations, the truth was clear. Kelechi's company was in trouble, and the only lifeline left was Chisholm's signature. Every proposal, every adjustment, every clause came back to her for approval. The men on his side of the table whispered frantically, trying to hide their desperation, but it was obvious. Without Chisholm's agreement, their business would sink. Kelechi sat there, watching her go through the documents with calm focus, his stomach twisting into knots. For the first time in his life, he truly felt what it meant to be powerless. The same woman he once thought was weak now held his future in her hands. It wasn't just about money or contracts, it was about respect, a respect he had failed to give her when she was his wife. As he stared at her, memories came flooding back. Her quiet obedience, the way she had once tried to please him, the tears she hid when he mocked her. He realized, with a pain sharper than a knife, that he had thrown away a jewel while chasing shadows. And now that jewel had become a crown, one he could never touch again. When Chisholm finally looked up, her expression was steady, her voice firm as she laid out her final conditions. The room listened intently, knowing her words carried the power to decide everything. Kelechi's throat went dry. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. This was Judgment Day. Every act of cruelty, every insult, every laugh at her expense had led him to this moment. The tables had turned completely. Once he made her beg for kindness. Now he was the one silently begging for mercy. For the first time, Kelechi understood the true cost of disrespect. It wasn't just losing love, it was losing everything. Do you want me to continue with part 14? A public reminder, 350 words. In the same emotional viral flow? Chisholm closed the file slowly and lifted her eyes, letting them rest on Kelechi for the first time since the meeting began. The room seemed to freeze. Everyone could feel the tension in the air, like electricity before a storm. Her gaze was calm, not angry, but sharp enough to pierce through him. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the entire boardroom. A man who cannot respect a woman has no place at my table. The words struck harder than any slap could. The silence that followed was heavy. The men shifted in their seats, some exchanging nervous glances, others bowing their heads. No one dared to speak. Kelechi's face burned with shame, his chest tightening as if the walls were closing in. For a moment, he wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. Chisholm didn't shout, didn't raise her hand, didn't insult him with harsh words. Yet her simple statement carried more power than years of revenge ever could. She wasn't just talking to Kelechi, she was talking to every man in that room, and even to the world beyond those walls. It was a reminder that respect is not optional, that every woman deserves dignity, and that arrogance always has a price. Her words echoed in Kelechi's mind, dragging him back to that night when he struck her as his friends laughed. Back then, he thought respect was something he could take away from her. But now he realized respect was something she carried within her, something he had never been able to break. The boardroom remained silent, every man present humbled. Chisholm leaned back in her chair, her face calm, her authority unquestioned. She had spoken not just as a CEO, but as a woman who had turned her pain into power. That single sentence became the line that separated her past from her present. And in that silence everyone understood. They were no longer looking at the broken woman Kelechi once humiliated. They were looking at the victor. Do you want me to finish with part 15, her victor? The meeting ended, but the weight of Chisholm's words still hung in the air. She gathered her files calmly, stood up, and walked out with a quiet grace that made everyone rise to their feet without even thinking. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing like a reminder of how far she had come. She didn't rush, she didn't look back. She simply carried herself with the dignity of a woman who had conquered her past. Kelechi sat frozen, his eyes following her as regret twisted in his chest. The men who once laughed with him now avoided his gaze. They all knew the truth. The woman they had mocked had risen higher than all of them. Chisholm's victory wasn't just about the company or the deal. It was about reclaiming her worth, about showing the world that no humiliation could stop a determined soul. As she pushed open the boardroom doors, a small smile touched her lips. Years ago, those same tears that fell in silence had seemed like weakness. But now she understood. They had been the beginning of her strength. What once was her deepest shame had transformed into her greatest triumph. And everyone in that room, including Kelechi, would carry the memory of that day as a lesson carved deep in their hearts. Never underestimate a woman who refuses to be broken. Do you want me to now combine all 15 parts into one continuous 4,000+ word viral script with dialogues so it flows like a full emotional story?